Welcome to the CEO Project Podcast, where Jim Schlexer, author of the best-selling book, Great CEOs Are Lazy, and the founder of the CEO Project, provides ideas and tools to help CEOs of mid to large-sized companies grow and optimize their businesses. Now, let's get started with the show. Welcome, everybody, to the CEO Project Podcast. My name is Jim Schlexer. I'm your host and your friendly questioner. Well, today we've got somebody who writ large is in the same business as the CEO Project. I wouldn't say we're competitors or anything, but because he focuses on a very different area. But Alan Murray is the former CEO of Fortune Media, a prominent author and speaker on leadership issues, and a longtime veteran of the Wall Street Journal. He leads the Dow Jones Leadership Institute, and that includes the Wall Street Journal CEO Council, which you may have seen something about, community of top business leaders, as well as the CMO network, the CIO network, the CCO network, the CFO network. We should just call it the CXO network. But anyway, Murray was previously the CEO of Fortune Media, where he oversaw the company's business and editorial operations and expanded digital and conference franchisees. He spent over 2 decades with the Wall Street Journal, serving as deputy managing editor, executive editor online, Washington bureau chief, and he was also the Washington bureau chief for CNBC, and he is the author of multiple books. You don't sleep much, do you?
I like what I do. I enjoy my job. Thank you for having me on.
I'm so glad to have you. This is exciting. Alan joined rejoined, I guess, the Wall Street Journal with this particular project not that long ago, and I'll be interested to hear how it's been going. So what, I mean, you got a great journey there. What brought you back to this particular place of the Leadership Institute at the Wall Street Journal? Why is that like a perfect fit for you?
Well, in a way, it's a homecoming for me. Look, my history was I was at the Journal for 20 years, did various jobs, was the Washington bureau chief, as you said. But by around 2005, it became clear that the Journal, like all legacy media companies, was struggling. The
Yeah.
internet had really clobbered us, and you could see the revenue numbers going down as advertisers had multiple opportunities at lower price to reach the audiences they wanted to reach. And so I started paying attention to, geez, what can we do to provide new value, and got involved in starting a CEO council at the Journal in 2008, and a number of other initiatives. Was working on video initiatives, digital initiatives. I left about 12 years ago, went to Fortune first as editor, and then, as you said, as CEO. But I was doing many of the same things there. I mean, Fortune was on the same downhill slide that the Journal was on. The traditional print advertising revenue was drying up, and the trick was to create new sources of revenue using these great brands that would hold it up. And again, we did a lot in the area of conferences, video, other areas like that. I did that for 5 years, and then decided the ownership shifted to an Asian owner. I decided I kind of had enough of it. And when I left, the CEO of Dow Jones called me up and said, "You should come back and build this here." And what convinced me to do it, frankly, Jim, and you know this because you see this in your own businesses, the last 5 years have just thrown an amazing amount of stuff at the people who are trying to run large organizations, whether it's COVID or the George Floyd reaction among their employees, or the invasion of Ukraine and the demand to pull out of Russia, or most amazing of all was the launch of ChatGPT, the rise of generative AI, and the potential for that to transform companies. And all of that just convinced me that we live in a world where the pace of change is continuously accelerating.
Yep.
That poses a huge challenge to large organizations, because large organizations are at their heart filled with inertia. It's hard for them to move at that pace of change. And that the great challenge of the future, in my mind, was not technology. It was leadership and human organizations, and how do you get human organizations to change at the pace that technology is changing. So that's what convinced me to come back and do this.
That's fair. I remember an article I read once, and the line was, the change has never been faster in human society. It was written in 1885, I think. So it's like, I mean, it's always true, an eternal veritude that just change is going to get faster and faster. But
Yeah.
um, well, and let's just go back to
And Jim, let me just say
yeah,
one
please.
thing on that, if I can, because what you see, the reason that's so, it has always been true, but the reason that's such a challenge now is because you see technology going up this J curve.
Yeah.
Just the rate of change in technology really is kind of mind-boggling, and human organizations are changing, but not nearly as fast, and a gap is developing.
Well, I've always said that, organic things like people and organizations don't change as fast as inorganic things like technology. Just not
Yeah.
possible. We can't adapt that quickly. So we're always playing catch up in that regard.
And they weren't built to. I mean, the
Yeah.
corporation was invented in the 19th and 20th century, and it's not ready fit for the problems of the 21st century.
Wow. Well, that's profound. Going back to putting words on paper for a minute, just, I mean, there's
Yeah.
been a complete destruction of that business model of words on paper, advertising driven. It feels like your solution is go high and low, go digital on one side and go very humanistic, very engaged on the other side. In the middle is probably, which is words on paper, probably in my little model, may not exist for much longer.
Uh, I think that, well, with one exception,
Yep.
with a couple of exceptions, actually, I think there's something to that. Certainly, the high-low strategy is what we pursued at Fortune, where
Sure.
we were trying to get a large audience on digital because you have to get a large audience to properly monetize it,
Right.
and then at the same time deal with smaller specialist audiences. And that was part of what I built at the Wall Street Journal. But one of the things that has happened is a recognition that there at the Journal, the New York Times, that there are people out there who are willing to pay for quality information. And the subscription bases that the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times have built are substantial, a substantial bulwark against that those two extremes that you talked about.
But I
I
think
mean,
only a couple of
we're like we've got like 5 million, 6 million subscribers at the Wall Street Journal now who are paying real money to
yeah, no,
read
I'm
it
one of them.
digitally.
I love the journal. Don't get me wrong, and but there's only a few brands that have that kind of
I think that's right.
gravitational pull that they're going to survive that process. If you're
I think that's right.
a marginal, if you're not Washington Post, New York Times, Journal, and a couple others, you don't have enough to
Yeah.
retain, I think.
We tried to do it at Fortune, but it was a struggle.
Yeah, yeah. We dealt with a smaller magazine, and they were just dying on the vine. And the biggest problem was the cost, the CPM, the cost per thousand of digital was a fraction of what it was in print, and there was economically very few ways to get home, unfortunately.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right, which is unfortunate because what it means is that quality information ultimately is only going to be available to the people who can afford to pay for it or willing to pay for it.
Well, and you've seen a lot of them go to these sort of user-generated content models with very little true journalism, fact check
Right.
journalists. And you're right, it's going to be only little crusty slice of the world that's going to get that stuff. In your engagement with CEOs, what are you seeing as sort of top of mind issues? You sort of hit a laundry list earlier, but what do you see them like really saying, we got to get this figured out or we're going to have a big problem on our hands? Top couple, maybe.
Well, well, it's been a wild year in that regard, right?
Mm,
I mean, until the end of last year, CEOs would consistently say to me, and I'm sure say to you, I don't want to have anything to do with Washington, D.C. I want to stay as far away from politics as I possibly
yeah.
can. Please keep it away from me. And the president has made it impossible for the big companies to take that stance. He's forced them to Washington, and they're all now obsessed with it. How are tariffs going to affect my business? Are export controls going to affect my business? How are geopolitics going to affect my supply chain? Is my supply of semiconductors going to be at risk? Is the Middle East war going to lead to problems in the Suez Canal that makes it hard for me to get my products? So issues that weren't high on the CEO agenda, like geopolitics and politics, have become high on the agenda. And we spend a lot of time at the Wall Street Journal Leadership Institute focusing on those things. But I'll tell you my experience over the last year is no matter how much noise there is about tariffs, no matter how many wars we have going on in the world, nothing trumps the AI revolution
Yeah.
that is just washing like a huge wave over every company and every business, and they're all struggling with how to deal with it.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and the tariff thing, when we talk to CEOs, go, look, it's like the rain. It's going to affect everybody. Now, so your competitors have exactly the same, maybe uneven, but the same ground that you have to deal with. So
Yeah, or
it's not
another
going to
way to
change
think.
anything because everybody's got the same base.
Yeah, yeah. I heard. I think it was Julie Sweet, the CEO of Accenture, say, there's nothing you can do about
Right.
it. There's
Right.
nothing you can do about the terrorists. There's probably not much you can do about the war. But AI is within your
Yeah.
control.
And
Your AI fate is in your hands. So why not pay attention to something you have some say in?
I think that's a great insight that, when people yell about politics, I go, so what are you going to do? You can vote for the other guy, but probably not going to change anything. So with regard to AI, where are you seeing people adopt it? What are the use cases where you see them getting really interesting changes in economics or performance as a result of AI deployment? Because this is the question I think a lot of CEOs are asking is, it's an amazing technology looking for the right problems to solve. And we got to figure out what are the right problems for it to solve.
Yeah, I think that's right. And for the first couple of years, you heard a lot about what one CEO referred to as pilot purgatory. Everybody was doing lots of pilots, and
Yeah,
then they woke up one day and say, "Well, we have a lot of pilots, but none of these is really doing that much for the company. And
right.
how do we take it to scale?" You're starting to hear some companies making breakthroughs, but I do think it's been sort of slower than people thought.
Yeah.
Um, where are you seeing the breakthroughs? Well, an awful lot of computer code is being written by AI right now. Now,
Yes.
at some big companies, the CIO or the general counsel may say, stop it. You can't do that because we don't know whose IP you may be using to build these things. But even at those places, it's awfully hard to control. I mean, there was an interesting report out of IBM a couple of weeks ago that talked about all the shadow IT, where basically coders are using this stuff to help them do their jobs and not necessarily with adequate controls in place or permissioning in place. So a lot is happening on the developer front. A lot is happening in the marketing space.
Hmm.
Again, because it's such a powerful tool for rewording messages and targeting messages to particular audience. So you see that happening pretty fast. A lot is happening on the customer service front, although I still am amazed at the number of times I find myself talking to a customer bot that can't answer the
Yep.
simplest of questions. Say,
Yep.
wait a minute, we're in the age of AI. What's going on here? But there are others that are figuring it out and it's happening. So I think those are the three areas where you see the most movement. But to me, the most fascinating piece is the rise of AI agents. And look, that term is being overused right now. Everything's being called an AI agent. But I sat at a dinner, and this was off the record, so I can't identify the company, but it was one of the biggest banks, and they have reached the point where they have AI agents that are that have employee identification numbers, they have email addresses, they have logons on the computer
Wow.
system, they are acting side by side. It's easy for everyone in the company to identify the agents from the people, but they're working side by side with the people being evaluated next to the people. That just opens up, a totally different world that I think we're moving to. Uh, I, I don't, going back to what I said earlier, it's like fast and slow, right? It's really, why is it taking so long for organizations to adopt it? But once they adopt it, it's going to come at us pretty
Yeah,
fast.
pretty game changer. And I've seen some of that where, take data from all these sources, do this transformation with it based on that, any of these 5 actions that we'd like you to take on a regular basis. So, that monthly marketing report, you're not going to need a human to put that together anymore. There's no reason for it.
No, and one of the things we started at the Leadership Institute is a new chief people officer community, because those folks are getting hit with some of the
Oh gosh.
toughest, most mind-bending questions. What? How do you evaluate a manager who only manages AI agents? Or how do you train people to manage AI agents side by side with people?
Yep.
All of those things, those are just questions that didn't exist a year ago, and suddenly are being thrust on people, and it's a really interesting challenge for our corporations.
One of my professors in business school is writing a book about, how do you frame the utilization of AI? And part of it is in teaming, thinking about the kind of work that needs to be done and whether AI is better or humans better or a combination of those. And it's almost like part of the feedback, I'm reading it as a manuscript that I want to give them is I think there's a way to think about AI as a team member with a particular set of skills, right? So when we need this work done on the team, then the AI agent does it. And we need this kind of work, we have humans do it. And it varies based on the nature of the work.
I think that's a very smart way to think about it. But then the interesting next question is, does the team leader have to be a person, or can it be an agent? And I, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think I thought for a long time, well, this is what will keep people around, because we're social animals, and we, know how to build cohorts and teams. And but a I was in another conversation with a different CEO who runs one of the big uh, hospitals
Mhm.
in the country, was talking about some research they had done on medical information delivered by AI chatbots. And they actually said that the information given by the chatbot compared to information given by doctors was not only more likely to be correct,
Hmm.
but it was rated by the users as more empathetic. They liked the chat box conversation better than the doctor conversation because the chat bot was more empathetic,
Wow.
um, which sort of blows up the whole notion that the job for people in the future will to be social.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think once you can program empathy, you're all set, right? Which is really what's going on. They're programmed to
Yeah,
act in a certain way or to provide feedback or to give coaching. And that's
yeah,
all.
and they don't get tired in the afternoon. They they can keep doing it even if they haven't had their cup of coffee. So
Yeah,
it's
no, it's scary. You really extend the thinking, sort of sci-fi level. You go, what job isn't potentially going to be an AI job? And then what's the place for humans at that point?
yeah.
Uh, that,
Yeah. Now I'm of the view, and this is a view that is fed by. I studied economics, but I really studied economics history. I'm of the view that as long as people have imaginations, they will find plenty of things to do, and that we're not gonna. There's no sign we're running out of jobs. In fact, if anything, all the signs point to running out of people,
yep. Yep.
population growth slowing down, et cetera. So I don't think we're going to run out of jobs, but I do think that there's going to be a gap between the people who are ready to embrace this future and the people who aren't. We've seen that before in the past, and back to the things have never changed as fast. That gap is going to come on us quickly. I don't think we're spending nearly as much time as we need to thinking about, talking about, figuring out how do we put the systems in place to help people make this transition, because we're all going to have to make it, just like we all had to make the transition from agriculture to manufacturing and from manufacturing to knowledge industries.
Yep. Well, and it's interesting that, if you go over the last 40 years, the wealth is accumulated in the intelligentsia, right? And people that work with their hands have largely not gained. This may flip that paradigm, right? In other words, an
Good.
intellectual job, a computer can do it. It's just ones and zeros. But if I have to go
Plumbers
fix
are going to
it,
be okay. Plumbers are
right?
going to be okay.
Yeah, you got to go fix an HVAC system. You need a human to go do that because you got to. So this may invert the value proposition just a little bit. And you're right, there's scarcity. There's not enough trades out there at the moment, and not enough people doing them. And the population growth is going the wrong way, exacerbated by our view on immigration, unfortunately, right? Because
Yeah.
those people do those jobs. Not to be political about it, it's just numbers. So it's funny you didn't mention China as high on the list. Because if I went back 3 years or 4 years ago, people would go, China is a giant problem.
Yeah, well, I did mention geopolitics,
Well, fair
and
enough. Yeah.
I think under the geopolitical umbrella, China is the number one challenge. I mean, look, I sat in a room full of CEOs several months ago where someone stood up and asked the question, how many of you have, your companies are all global companies. How many of you are prepared for an event in Taiwan, a boycott of, or a blockade of Taiwan
Yep.
by the Chinese? And not a person raised their hand. And this person said, okay, fine, you're not ready, but Xi Jinping is, I mean, it's kind of like listening to Trump or Vladimir Putin. I mean, these people are not shy about saying what they're going to do. Xi
Mhm.
Jinping has been very clear. He wants this to happen before he leaves office. So we're talking about sometime in the next decade, it
Mm.
will have to happen if it's going to happen before he leaves office. And yet it's stunning how few companies have prepared themselves for that possibility. So I do think that's a big issue. And actually, I give credit to, I mean, it's the one thing that you've had some agreement over the course of the last two administrations in Washington that there has to be a national strategy to prepare the country for that possibility.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and you're seeing direct investment in semiconductor technology, for example. Like earlier today, they talked about an ownership stake in Intel to try to,
Yeah,
and there's others. That's not the only one. So, including the CHIPS Act. So, um, maybe a sensitive topic, but where do you see CEOs talking about DEI? Sort of it was, you mentioned, you know, Ray Floyd and so forth, but and it feels like that may have the environment may have changed around DEI. And what do you
definitely.
yeah. So what do you see?
Definitely. Uh, well, nobody wants to talk about it
Well,
because
yeah,
there's,
it's delicate, right?
you know, and and there's kind of a silver lining around that because there were some people who were just talking about it because of some perceived PR advantage. The purpose washing, DEI washing has stopped.
Yeah.
There's no advantage to talking about it. But the companies that really put it at the center of their strategy.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is like a couple of things. I mean, you've been at this for a long time, Jim. So I think you have seen what I'm about to say. But during my career, say the last 50 years, that's a little longer than my career, but not much. Um, there has been a profound shift in how value is created
Mm.
towards human beings. Um,
Mm.
there was a study done a few years ago that looked at the value on the balance sheets of companies in the 1970s versus today. In the 1970s, the value was all attributed to physical stuff. If you had
Mhm.
plant, if you had equipment, if you had oil in the ground, if you had inventory on the shelves, you could create value. You do the same, and it was more than 80% of the value on the books of Fortune 500 companies. If you look today, more than 85% of the value on the books of Fortune 500 companies is intangibles.
Yeah.
It's stuff, it's intellectual property, it's the brand connection that you create with your customers or your employees. Those are all human factors. And so human talent has just become a much more important part of the value creation than it
Mhm.
was 50 years ago. So I think that's part of what drove the DEI boom because if you're in a battle to get the best talent, you have to make sure that your hiring mechanism isn't doing what is kind of natural for human beings to do, which is hire more people like us.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so I think there was a misunderstanding often by many people that this was somehow some kind of a political movement. It wasn't a political movement. It was a movement by great companies that realized talent is at the core of their strategy. I mean, the best example of this in my mind is Walmart.
Mm.
Walmart is not a liberal woke company. Doesn't
Yep.
even operate in San Francisco and New York. Those are the two cities it's been banned from. It's the ultimate red state company led by a red state CEO, but he probably doesn't use the term DEI anymore, but is uh, more committed to uh, a human centered, diverse approach to his labor force than any CEO I know of. Now, it's not hard to find excesses that were committed in the name of
Sure.
DEI. Things got carried too far. But the fundamental idea that human beings are at the core of your workforce and that you better have a strategy that includes women, minorities, so that you're not constricting your talent pool.
Yeah. And why wouldn't you want the best talent without regard to any of those factors? I mean,
Right.
just put the best players on the field. I don't care who they are. That really, I've always thought that, like, I wish there was a way to say that because that doesn't feel like it's charged in any way. Like,
Yeah, and
you
but it
clearly want
does
the best talent in your company, right? Everybody would go, absolutely, done. That's it.
but it does require a recognition that there's a certain amount of that we are evolved from a white patriarchal society,
And there's
and
intrinsic bias.
and there's a certain amount of I want to be surrounded by people like me.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know if DEI programs were great or not great, but there has to be some leaning against the inertia that's built into the system.
There was a study done on boards, and it was a few years back,
Yeah.
but boards were almost universally wrinkly old white guys, right?
Yeah.
And then the related factor is about 85% of all board seats are filled by somebody known to somebody on the board.
Exactly.
So, like, how many friends do you have in diverse communities? The answer is not many. So, who are you going to bring onto the board? Somebody who's one of my friends who looks like me, and
Yeah,
that
well,
part of the
or
problem.
CEOs. I mean,
Yeah,
what, only 10, 11% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women.
yeah.
Do we think that's right? And I don't mean right from a moral sense. I mean, do we think that's a reflection of a meritocratic advancement system? Or I don't. I'm not sure it should be 50-50, but it doesn't make any sense to me based on the leaders I've known that it should be 90-10.
Right. No, yeah, we both met enough to say, yeah, you probably shouldn't have this job. So, um,
Yeah,
well, give us just a minute on what you do at the CEO Council with the CEOs. How do you engage with
sure.
them?
Sure. I think uh, I think the fundamental driving force behind the Leadership Institute is that peer exchange in a world where things are changing this fast, peer exchange, peer learning, peer interaction is one of the best ways to keep up with what's new. I mean, at the Wall Street Journal, we're in the business of news, right?
Mhm.
We're always trying to provide information and analysis about what's new. But in terms of tactics for how you deal with that and how you lead a company through it, peer discussions, peer exchange are very important. So, a big part of what we do, we create communities. We bring those communities together in person, we bring them together virtually. We are increasingly building up our ability to do one-on-one connections. So if you are a CEO and you have a particular problem and there's somebody else who's had the same problem, we can bring those two people together. We're looking at data that we can provide to help, and again, that gets to peer understanding what your peers are thinking. So one of the first things we're doing is creating an elite polling operation. So when something happens, when it, what did Donald Trump call his tariff day, Independence Day or Liberty, whatever
Yeah,
it was?
I don't remember. Yeah.
As soon as that happened, we were able to go out to our CEOs and say, what do you think this means to the economy over the course of the rest of the year? And we had responses that we were able to feed back to the others within 48 hours. So we can do things like that again are based on peer exchange that help
Right.
provide intelligence to CEOs, and we're looking at other things. Education is an interesting space, right? No one who is involved in running a large company has time to go back to a 10-week course at Harvard. Education is a funny thing. We have great education in this company, but it is not time efficient.
Right.
This is the one thing it certainly is not. And so we're looking at, well, is there a way we can provide education on some of these new topics when they come up in a time effective way that works for the people involved in busy
The other
organizations?
thing
So we have a lot.
we talk about because we do CEO peer groups as well, probably for slightly smaller companies, but it it's, if it was black and white, like I could go to Harvard and go to a class and learn the answer, I would have already figured out the answer a long time ago.
Yeah,
It's the 32 shades of gray problem with
yeah,
20 different factors going into it that I actually need to talk it out. And the problem is, as a CEO, you go, I can't go to the people that work for me because they all come out of their
that's right.
own view of the universe. I can't go to my board because that's not a no consequence environment, and some boards aren't particularly great. So who the heck do I talk to trying to run a very complicated organization that I can make a lot of mistakes if I'm not careful? And the answer is
Yeah.
other CEOs who get it is a great answer. So we're obviously fans of what you're doing, and we do it in a little different space. But yeah, awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's super important. There was this book that came out a year or so ago called the CEO Life Cycle,
Hmm.
and it was based on data of all the people who had served in like S&P 2000 CEO jobs in the first 20 years or 25 years of this millennium, and looking at the common threads over. And you sort of had a first year where you had a bit of a honeymoon, and then a second year where you had a sophomore slump, and then the third year was when your plans finally actually started to kick in
Hmm.
and have some results, or not, in which case you
Hmm.
were gone. But the part of it I found most interesting was there was this challenge that tended to happen somewhere around the fifth or sixth year as a CEO, when the strategies you put in place didn't work anymore because
Hmm.
the world had changed, because inevitably the world changes. And who were the CEOs that were able to change their own strategy and change their own approach to take advantage of changing circumstances? There was a great quote in the book of someone who said, now it's your own baby that you're calling ugly, not your
Yeah.
predecessors. And to me, that was the most interesting part of the book. The CEOs who had figured out how to get their heads outside of the company, because inside of the company you're the star, and
Yeah.
you've been doing it for 4 or 5 or 6 years, and everybody's sucking up to you
Yeah. I
and
say
telling
all
you
my
how
all
great
my
you are.
jokes were funny. Yeah.
Everyone is funny. And so how do you both have a mindset, but then get the information you need to actually see what's going on outside of the context of your company? And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to provide
That's fabulous.
leaders
Yeah.
with.
And I think there's a lot of CEOs that have 5-year life cycles because they aren't able to
They can't do it.
innovate the second time with the same
Yeah.
environment or similar environment. Well, Alan, this was fabulous. I think we could talk for hours, and we have previously. If somebody wanted to get a hold of your organization and see if they were right for you, what would be the best way to do that?
Well, if you search WSJ Leadership Institute, you'll get our website. There's a lot of information on that. But they can also reach out directly to me. I mean, I'm at alan.murray@wsj.com. Happy to hear from people directly. And I'm also doing a brief morning newsletter, the Wall Street Journal CEO Brief. Doesn't cost anything. But it's sort of a way to keep attached to what we're doing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much. This was
Thanks,
fascinating,
Jim.
as I knew it
Yeah.
would be.
Well, yeah, we're traveling down similar paths, but it's an important path. I mean, there's an awful lot of money and time being spent on technology, and more needs to be spent on this question of leadership.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you everybody for who joined us today. We will see you next time on the CEO Project Podcast. Thanks for listening to the CEO Project Podcast. We'll see you next time. Be sure to subscribe to get all the future episodes and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.